by 1931, 29 states had outlawed marijuana. And that was because there was this research that had been developed. I'm not exactly sure by who, but there was research that had come about that was sort of linking marijuana use with violent crimes and societal deviant behaviors, primarily committed by what they were referring to as racially inferior or underclass communities. And so at that point in time, legislation was enacted in 29 different states to outlaw marijuana. And then we come, down to 1936. There's some propaganda films that are put out by the French. Reefer Madness was one of the most popular ones. And then Hollywood steps in and says, okay, that's it. No marijuana in any, no marijuana or narcotics in any of these films that we're producing. And they sort of, add to this whole fear of drug use and marijuana. And now we're up to 37, where we have the Marijuana Tax Act. And the Marijuana Tax Act was essentially, they were trying to, fight against what they refer to as the evil weed, which is funny to me for a number of reasons. And this was supposed to be an excise tax for anybody who had medicinal and industrial uses for marijuana. But then we go to 1944, about 2 decades after the initial reports came out, or 14 years after the initial reports came out. And the New York Academy of Medicine says, you know what, all these studies that everybody did saying that marijuana was inciting violence and insanity, sex crimes, or addiction is completely false. And so everybody takes a step back and says, so who do we believe? Everybody from the 30s that were saying that all of these crimes that were occurring because immigrants were using cannabis, or was this perhaps maybe a coincidence, or was it maybe motivated by some other factors? And then we get to World War II, and all of a sudden we need hemp, and we need hemp pretty badly because it's a commodity used for marine cordage and several other very industrial items used. And so farmers are given the opportunity to start planting hemp. The government is giving them back the seeds and saying, help us plant the hemp. We'll go ahead and defer your, draft spot for World War II if you'll just go ahead and start growing. And so 375 acres of hemp are grown in the 40s as a way to, aid during World War II. And then pretty much from then on, we start having different acts from the 50s to the 90s. And, of course, the DEA is formed, and we're starting to really hone in on like, okay, marijuana is bad, but there isn't anything that's happened in between any of these years from 37 to now that's different from the beliefs that occurred in 1937. It really comes down to, in my mind, just political factors, different politicians' beliefs of what cannabis really was and wasn't doing in their communities, which just led to legislation being enacted. And so if you look over the course of time, there's not one specific incident that occurred where there was, let's say somebody who went and shot up a bunch of kids in a elementary school because they smoked a joint. It wasn't something like that, that occurred. It was just politicians believing that cannabis and marijuana use was going to negatively affect people in different societies and communities. And so, we get to the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, we've got Bush's war on drugs. And then finally by 96, things start to kind of even out, and we get Proposition 215 through. And at that point in time, medical marijuana starts to be utilized a little bit more readily in each of the states that have individuals who are interested in using medical marijuana. So I wish I could say that there was one point in history where there was this really big thing that happened that made everybody say, okay, this is why marijuana is bad, but really there isn't. It's just a course of time over each decade with legislation getting stricter and stricter and stricter in each of the states and at the federal level, and eventually ended up with a federal ban of marijuana altogether.
Let's start with the bad first. Put that up. Okay, here's some of the negative things about cannabis, which most of us already know, and the sources are underneath them. So, used by teens harms brain development. The second bad thing about cannabis can become an addictive drug for some people, can harm people at risk for mental health disorders, poses risks to baby during pregnancy, may increase heart attack risk, can be harmful to lungs, and not safe to drive after consumption. That's the bad. Now let's put up the good. Then again, the sources are just below each line item. Please pay attention to that. FDA approved cannabidiol for children with rare form of epilepsy. So from the FDA, can help reduce anxiety in the appropriate amount, can relieve also chronic pain and nausea. I think a lot of folks have been prescribed medicinal marijuana that have cancer for that reason. Helps people with multiple sclerosis, and again, it reduces nausea, vomiting in chemotherapy patients. So those are some of the pros and cons that we dug up doing some research on pros and cons of cannabis. NBA, I think this just recently happened, is removing marijuana from its list of banned substances as part of a new collective bargaining agreement.
You did a nice job putting up your pros and your cons in the beginning of this segment. And we did see on the pro side that medicinal cannabis use can be very effective for individuals that have certain types of ailments. And chronic pain is one of those ailments. And while I don't know exactly why the NBA made that decision, I haven't had time to really investigate that. I would assume that it must have something to do with the fact that, you know, when you are a professional athlete at playing as many games as you are in the NBA and working as hard as you are at that level, that perhaps you may have a player or two who needs marijuana for medicinal purpose uses, and preventing them from having that available could be detrimental.